Joining us on the program tonight, Dave Kopel of the Independence Institute. Dave, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Glad you could be with us tonight. I read your column in the Wall Street Journal, Guns, Mental Illness in Newtown, and I said on the program tonight I'm trying to do the job that I hope all of my colleagues in the media would do, and to be respectful, to just set a different tone than what we're hearing. And I thought that this was a very, very thoughtful piece, actually, in the Wall Street Journal. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on. You're a thoughtful guy. I'm not surprised that this was a thoughtful piece, but very short on the talking points and the table pounding, and very, I think, full of facts. So I appreciate you writing this, first of all.
Well, thank you. It was quite a process in production, because my computer got hit by a virus in the afternoon as I was responding to the Wall Street Journal's edits. So we had quite an exciting afternoon trying to get things fixed and get it in before the Wall Street Journal. I guess their page closes at 5:30, and they got to send it out. So anyway, it was there were some challenges on but I was glad to get it out, because we do have a serious national problem, and that's something that calls for serious solutions that could actually save lives, and not just the political exploitation we've been seeing from some folks.
Yeah, and now, so you say Alan Langford of the University of Alabama analyzed data from a recent New York Police Department study of active shooters, and you say, counting only the incidents with at least 2 casualties, there were 179 such crimes between 1966 and 2010. In the 80s, there were 18. In the 90s, there were 54. In the last decade, there were 87. So we are seeing an increase in this, Dave. You ask the first question, okay, so why are we seeing this increase? What's causing it?
And by the way, the increase is just to be precise, if you're talking about multiple victim homicides, we have not seen an increase in that in 30 years. The case where a guy goes into a public place and slaughters 5 people at work he all hates, that's not what Langford was counting, although that situation I just described has been on the whole neither increasing or decreasing in the last 30 years. But when besides killing somebody, some personal enemy, he then goes on and kills at least one victim for whom there's not some kind of motivation.
Right.
That the victim wasn't targeted, based on his individual characteristics.
Right.
That's what we've seen an increase of, these, kind of random, the randomness of an increase in random attacks.
Okay. Now, you say this cannot be because gun control laws have become more lax. Why is that?
Well, because as of, say, 1965, when these kinds of things were essentially unknown, we had basically no gun control. I mean, other than the National Firearms Act of 1934, so you have to pay a heavy tax to buy a machine gun. At the federal level, there were very few laws. You had to be a license to buy and sell firearms in interstate commerce. You had to have a federal firearms license. But getting down to the consumer level, there was close to nothing. And of course, the AR-15 was put on the market in 1964. So it's not like, I mean, you could walk in a store in 1964, a hardware store, and buy a AR-15, cash and carry, no questions asked, no background check, no paperwork, no nothing, and we weren't having these crimes back then. So whatever has changed is not that we've had fewer gun laws. We have quite a lot more than we do these days.
Okay, so then
we have many more now than then.
Yeah. Okay, and so then you ask one plausible answer, maybe the media, cable TV in the 90s, the internet today, greatly magnify the instant celebrity that a mass killer can achieve, and we know that many would-be mass killers obsessively study their predecessors. So in other words, while gun control laws since the 1960s have gotten more restrictive, the media environment, and again, I don't want to talk about legislation, but the media environment has become more widespread. It has become more freewheeling. It has become less restrictive. Yeah?
Yes, I mean, less restrictive, not in the sense of really changes in the laws regarding this,
Right.
but absolutely less restrictive in the sense of
How about
the sort of
professional ethics?
responsibility and propriety that newspapers have. I mean, you wouldn't have, in 1964, they wouldn't have been interviewing 8-year-olds 45 minutes after they escaped from a scene where they saw people murdered.
Yeah, and so you say a second explanation is the deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill. 2000 New York Times study of 100 rampage murderers, you say, found 47 of them were mentally ill. Journal of American Academy of Psychiatry Law, you cite a study reporting 16% of state prisoners who had perpetrated murders were mentally ill. And you say back in the mid-'60s, the landscape and how we dealt with the mentally ill in our society was far different.
Yes. So we had a major trend towards deinstitutionalization starting in the 1960s and continuing ever since. And part of that was as a result of the Ken Kesey's great book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest,
Mm-hmm.
and that there certainly were people, who had been put in mental institutions, for no good reason and without due process. Because say a 17-year-old girl was promiscuous and rebellious, her family might sometimes have her locked up, and that
Right.
was, of course, horrible. But there were also people who should have been in institutions who aren't there anymore, or there was going to be this big move towards halfway houses, except they were, semi-supervised living kind of in the community, but they were never really properly built or funded. And we have this, problem that the large amount of services that mentally ill people might need to be able to somewhat live in the community just aren't there. The prison guards lobby is probably equal to the teachers union in terms of its influence and its ability to procure government spending. But as with probation and parole, which are drastically underfunded,
Mm-hmm.
these things that could be so important and so helpful don't even have close to the resources they need.
All right, and now you say the final thing. You say it must be acknowledged that many of these attacks today unfortunately take place in pretend, quote-unquote, gun-free zones such as schools, movie theaters, and shopping malls. You say, according to Ron Borsch's study for the Force Sciences Research Center at Minnesota State University, Mankato, active shooters are different from the gangsters and other street toughs whom a police officer might engage in a gunfight. They, meaning the active shooters, are predominantly weaklings and cowards who crumble easily as soon as an armed person shows up.
Exactly. What the Force Science Institute is saying is if you're a police officer and you get a call that, some guy's robbing a liquor store.
Right.
And it turns out that, he's one of the Crips. And the gangster sees you show up. He may say, oh, this is great. I'm going to have a gun battle and a fight with a police officer. I can't wait. And I've been practicing for this for a long time, and I'm a pretty tough guy, and can't wait to take him on. But these active shooters crumble as soon as somebody with a gun shows up. They don't fight it. There are a few exceptions, but they very, very rarely try to fight it out. They usually just kill themselves at that point. So what saves lives is when does the first person with a gun show up? And you can really look at the difference between last Wednesday and last Friday. Last Wednesday at the Clackamas Mall in Oregon, some guy came into the mall and started shooting people. There was a man who had a carry permit under Oregon law, thank God, and thank you, NRA, for getting that law passed back in 1989, that he drew his gun on the attacker. The attacker saw him with the gun trained at the attacker, and the attacker's next shot was to kill himself. So two innocent people were killed at the Clackamas Mall and there was immediate active resistance with a firearm. At Newtown, there was no resistance until the police showed up on the scene, and that's 26 people dead. So that's the difference, is that the time it takes the police to get there is the difference between 2 dead people and 26 dead people. And if we are, as President Obama said, serious about this, that we will not tolerate it any longer and that we have to change, then this has got to be an essential part of what has to change. That you can't say that a third grade teacher who is licensed by the state of Connecticut, for example, because she's passed a fingerprint-based background check, she's passed a safety training class, and the state of Connecticut has said, you are trustworthy and safe to carry a concealed handgun for lawful protection of yourself and others everywhere in the state of Connecticut, except when you go to work and you're in charge of protecting the safety of these small children. We cannot have the loophole that makes public schools into safe zones for mass murderers.
Let me ask you a question, Dave. You finish your piece in the Wall Street Journal. You say people who are serious about preventing the next Newtown should embrace much greater funding for mental health, strong laws for civil commitment of the violently mentally ill, and stop kidding themselves that pretend gun-free zones will stop killers. Can you talk about the difference between what you describe as a pretend gun-free zone and a real gun-free zone?
Sure. So Colorado law sets a good example. If you are under Colorado's Concealed Carry Act, let's say you've got a city office building, and the city manager says, well, we don't want people having guns in here. Then you can make that, then the Concealed Carry Act specifically says, you bet, you can make that a gun-free zone. And you have to make it a real one, which means you control the building entrances. At the building entrances, which are open to the public, there have to be metal detectors. And the metal detectors have to be backed up by armed personnel, typically local police or sheriff's deputies. And then you've got a real gun-free zone. Real gun-free zones, great. I've got no problem with that. That's fine. The problem is when you have a pretend gun-free zone, like the Aurora Cinemark movie theater. We know that the murderer there had a number of other theaters that were showing Batman closer to his apartment. He went to the one theater that happened to be a pretend gun-free zone. So what you do in a pretend gun-free zone is you prohibit every law-abiding person from being able to protect himself, and then to make things particularly reckless, you often don't provide any kind of armed substitute, such as a security guard or a police officer. Pretend gun-free zones are magnets for mass murderers. More gun-free zones? I'm behind it. But we've got to get rid of pretend gun-free zones because those are just, they're really mass murder facilitation zones.
All right, so a follow-up, and I think this will be the last question for you, Dave. I think it's tough for a lot of people to accept the idea that putting up the sign will not deter folks. Like it's human nature. You want to believe that these steps will work. What does it take to actually have that cultural acceptance that a sign or a piece of paper, just as an order of protection against a domestic abuser, for instance? I've covered these stories where women have gotten their order of protections, and it's a piece of paper to somebody who doesn't give a damn about what the law is.
Yeah.
And what does it take to have that conversation to say, even if you fully support gun control and you want to ban all kinds of guns, we have to talk about some things like a sign is not going to matter to people who don't care about human life.
Right, and it's a sign that does matter to the people who do. I mean, these things are positively harmful because the only people who obey them are the law-abiding, and they become easy victims. So I think if we're going to if the president's serious about what he's saying and really wants to do something to change this, then this ought to be part of the package. And for the people who are for gun control, because they want to ban the AR-15 or whatever, because they think it's some kind of super duper powerful firearm, which of course we know it isn't. But getting rid of pretend gun-free zones doesn't stop any other things. This is, you can be for 50 things that Michael Bloomberg proposes.
Right.
And you can be for no more pretend gun-free zones.
Talking with Dave Kopel, research director at the Independence Institute. And Dave, listen, I really appreciate you coming on the program. I think this conversation and this discussion is going to continue. And again, I think we've got to talk about things like this, things that we haven't really thought about, many of us. But again, I really appreciate you for contributing to the conversation tonight.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Dave Kopel joining us from the Independence Institute.